So, after making a guide of the emblems in-game, I decided to start working on one for the DLC. But since the original was an hour long, and I didn't want to make another hour-long video, I decided to split this one up into parts for each wave. You're welcome. The Wave 2 video will be out in a few days. I've already filmed all of the footage I need, and the Wave 3 video will be out shortly after Wave 3 releases. As per usual, we'll be going through every aspect of these emblems in depth. If you need a refresher on how emblem skills work, what sync skills are, what are inheritables, etc., check out the first part of my first guide. A link should be on screen. Before we jump into it, let me briefly explain Engage Attack Plus, which is a new feature for DLC Emblems. Every single DLC emblem has a plus version of their Engage Attack when standing next to the other emblem from their game. Note, this does not work the other way around. When I say standing next to the other emblem, I only mean that the emblem must be equipped by a unit nearby. They do not have to be engaged. For example, Edelgard can activate her Engage Attack Plus by being next to Byleth. Byleth must only be equipped to a nearby unit. They do not need to be engaged as well. Byleth gains no benefits from this, and unfortunately does not get a Goddess Dance Plus. How cool would it be if he did? Anyways, enough about that. Let's jump into it with Edelgard, Dimitri, and Claude, the Emblem of Rivals. All three characters share one ring, and due to their sync skill-friendly rivalry, they switch out at a random at the start of each turn. Sometimes you'll have Dimitri for 3 turns straight, other times you'll cycle through everyone 8 times in one level. You really never know what you're getting. Luckily, the only thing that changes is the Gambit sync skill, which allows you to perform one of 3 different special actions depending on who is in front. Edelgard gives you Flame Gambit, a move that sets things on fire. The flames expand 1 space on either side of the enemy, including diagonals, which means if you're attacking up close, it includes the space you're standing on. This makes the attack a little stronger when using on a range, a non-diagonal range at least. You can still double crit and activate any other skills as normal, and Flame Gambit will still activate if you kill the enemy. It's good for making sure enemies don't come near you, though not having it on demand means you sometimes don't have it when you want it. And the fire landing on your own square when used up close makes me like it a little less than the other fire attacks like Roy's or Corin's. Claude's Poison Gambit works very similarly to Flame Gambit in that it augments your normal attack, allowing you to double, crit, and activate other skills as normal. It poisons the targeted enemy and any other adjacent enemies. The poison activation is separate from any combat activated poison, so if the unit is already using a dagger, you'll have poison applied twice. Of course, you still can't go over the maximum of 3 stacks. Poison isn't very good except in a few situations. I really like it on bosses with lots of health bars as it just makes sure I get that last bit of damage in. Outside of that though, Claude has easily the weakest of the available gambits. Doesn't have any drawbacks though, unlike Edelgard's Fire, so if you ever do end up with it, you may as well click the button, you know? There's no reason not to. Your final gambit is Dimitri's Shield Gambit. Shield Gambit works completely different than the other two, as it's enemy phase oriented. Activating Shield Gambit negates the damage from the first attack of ranged foes. First attack of ranged foes means the first attack a ranged foe deals to you in a round of combat. You still negate damage from multiple ranged foes if they attack you. It's basically bonded shield, except it only hits this unit, has a 100% activation rate, and only affects ranged enemies. It's still extremely strong. Got an army of mages running into Luis? Who cares? Need to tank a fireball from Corrupted Worm? Done. There's a lot of situations where Shield Gambit makes it incredibly easy to tank things you shouldn't be able to normally. The problem is, you don't have access to Shield Gambit on demand. Since you only get this skill 1/3 of the time, the odds of you having it during a time it would be helpful are really low. It also uses up your turn, so on turns when you need to attack rather than play defensively, you'll be mad Dimitri showed up instead of Edelgard or Claude. This Gambit being so different than the other two in terms of when you use it is the main reason I feel Gambit as a whole is kind of weak. Next we have our Engage skill Combat Arts. We have 3 different combat arts, but unlike Gambits, these can be used on demand once you engage regardless of the character who is out in front. These combat arts all sacrifice engaged turns in order to perform a special attack. These attacks must be performed with your engaged weapons, so you can't use your Super Forged Axe to activate Raging Storm, unfortunately. But they're still very strong most of the time. Speaking of, Raging Storm is our first combat art. This attack uses Edelgard's axe Ymir, and after performing it, you'll get an extra turn. Being able to perform an attack and then do another action without using your dancers is obviously really powerful. The attack can crit, double, and activate skills as per normal as well, as do the other combat arts. So what's the downside? You have to use Ymir, which is a smash weapon. This means your enemy will be attacking first for the turn you activate Raging Storm, which often means you'll be taking a lot of damage you don't want to take. Ymir also has some accuracy issues. Even on my more accurate units, I have trouble getting above 75 to 80 hits, and it weighs a lot on top of that. Basically, not every unit finds this combat art easy to use. I recommend using its target archers so you don't have to take extra hits. This attack also costs 3 engaged turns, which before Bond 11 is all of your turns. Dimitri's Atrocity doubles your weapon's weight, which gives you a nice raw power boost. If you aren't at Bond 10 and haven't unlocked Edelgard as a weapon, this attack will still use Edelgard, but will not leave you holding it after the attack ends. This means you can use it for a lance attack and then be left defending with whatever weapon you had equipped before you used the combat art, at least at low Bond levels. Edelgard by default already grants might plus 50%, so I believe this attack actually does 250% of your might instead of doubling it, which is a lot of damage on a weapon that already has pretty high might at 14. Plus, you can still double with it, unlike Ymir, and get increased might on both attacks if you do. Basically, very few things outside of the tankiest armor knights will survive Atrocity. This attack only uses one of your turns, so you'll stay engaged and get to use another one next to it. I consider it less useful than Ymir's extra turn, but if you just need something dead and don't need to move again, this usually beats Ymir out for raw damage. The 75 hit on Edelgard instead of Ymir's 60, and the lower 9 weight instead of 11, also makes it work a little more universally on all your non-magic units, though the hit is still a little low. Claude's Fallen Star is a really interesting combat art. You'll perform a regular attack with Fail Not and then avoid all of your opponent's attacks during your next fight. Unlike Shield Gambit, this only works on the very next fight you get in, not your entire turn. That being said, it avoids attacks regardless of the range it was initiated from, and so it can be used to guard against up-close attacks as well as far-away attacks, unlike Shield Gambit. Fallen Star is a move you'll use a lot at low Bond, and more rarely at high Bond. Fail Not is a really strong weapon due to being usable at 3 range, but you don't get access to it until Bond level 15. This can actually be used in your favor. On player phase, you can use Fallen Star to pick up a kill from 3 away, but if you haven't unlocked Fail Not, you'll be left defending with whatever weapon you had out before, most likely a melee weapon. Since defending with a bow is ill-advised, this is a really great strategy to get the most out of Fail Not on player phase while ignoring its weakness on enemy phase. I've used this a lot to snipe hard to reach flying targets, and it's very strong. It also uses up only one of your turns, so you have a few uses of it before running out. The main weakness to the attack is the hit on Fail Not being only 75 like Edelgard. All 3 combat arts get a 10% damage boost due to Dragon Synergy, and covert units get a 20 avoid boost when using the combat art. That avoid boost makes Raging Storm usable on covert units who normally have lower defenses and don't really want to let their enemies get free hits in. Other than that though, not too much to note here. Next we have our engage attack, Houses Unite. Houses Unite allows us to attack with Ymir, Edelgard, and Fail Not at 50% damage, leading to a 150% damage attack. Since this is an engage attack, you cannot double the enemy with it or crit. You can still activate skills like Luna or Soul though, and since this attack always hits the low accuracy of the 3 weapons, isn't so bad to deal with. I think this attack is fine. It breaks sword and lance units, it does not break axes, and Fail Not should deal effective damage to flyers, while Ymir and Fail Not both deal effective damage to dragons. That being said, 150% damage is still less than doubling in most cases, and it doesn't always feel that useful. We do get some strong synergies. Dragon units deal 10% extra damage per hit, for a total of 180% damage, just shy of the damage you get by doubling. Cavalry adds 10% damage to Edelgard, armor to Ymir, and covert to Fail Not. 3 adepts will always break their opponent, which gives you utility against tomes, axe, knife, and punch enemies. However, Houses Unite becomes incredibly strong when used next to Violet. Houses Unite Plus allows the unit to take an extra turn, just like Raging Storm does, but with none of the drawbacks of Raging Storm. This is so strong because by using Houses Unite Plus in Raging Storm, you can give your unit 3 actions. Hell, Violet is right there, so you're probably getting Goddess Danced for a 4th. I think because it's based on using your extra move, it's also a lot easier to purposely set up without costing you turns than the other Engage Plus attacks. Because Engage Plus attacks are kind of a hidden feature that the game doesn't tell you about, I've seen people say this ring is a lot weaker than it actually is. Houses Unite Plus is a really important part of the Emblems kit that gives them a massive power boost when used next to Violet. Let's talk about inheritable skills. This ring doesn't have that much you want to inherit. Assembly Gambit is weird because it's a skill that's straight up not available in any way on the ring besides inheriting, but it doesn't seem like it's worth a skill slot at the cost of 1,500 SP. Lineage gives you a free 20% EXP boost, basically your paragon of this game, and for only 150 SP it's a steal. The strength and dex boost is okay, but since strength plus 5 is cheaper and dex isn't that important of a stat, I think most units would rather just pick up strength plus 5 from Roy. Still, if you have an extra 8,400 SP, you don't. You could take it up and it's technically better. Weapon Sync gives you a plus 7 damage boost if your weapon matches the emblem's weapon or if you are engaged. I think this is really bad on the house leader since they keep switching weapons and leave you with shit you don't want, meaning it's best used when engaged. However, inheriting this and using it on other emblems who have a more limited weapon type available could make it good. I mean, most sword units could use this on almost every emblem in the base game, so. Bowguard lets you take 5 less damage from bow enemies. This can keep a tanky flyer alive, but most tanky units who aren't flyers aren't taking much from bow enemies already, so it's usually not that good. For weapons, we already went over these 3 when talking about combat arts, but I'll summarize real quick for the sake of thoroughness. Ymir is a powerful high might axe that's effective against dragons, but being a smash weapon means enemies attack first, so I like this better on defense than offense. Harried Bar is a strong lance that increases might by 50%, giving it a might of 21. That's 3 points behind Ymir still, and it has a lower crit rate as well, but makes up for it with a lighter weight and better hit and being able to double. A good all-around weapon that hits hard without too many glaring weaknesses. Bailknot is the weakest of the 3 with only 13 might, note that 13 is still pretty high, but makes up for it with 2 to 3 range and a 20 avoid boost when equipped. Great for taking pop shots and flying enemies from relative safety, and if you are ever in danger, the avoid boost is great, though the lack of counterattacks from one range is not as helpful. These weapons are all identical to the versions you would get from Byleth, but obviously it's a little harder to select what you're going to get out of Byleth since you're usually putting them on someone you want to be dancing, yada yada yada. For proficiencies, you get axes, lances, and bows. Thank God these DLC emblems don't give you swords. This is a great emblem for getting access to the other parts of the weapon triangle or for having someone turn into an archer if Lyn is busy. Here's our old tier list, except I removed the spoiler one from the end of the last video. I had a lot of debate on where to put this emblem. At first, I felt B tier, since its passive usefulness is very low compared to a lot of the emblems due to the random nature of gambits. But then, there's arguments that they belong in S tier just for Houses Unite Plus and being able to stack extra turns with that and Raging Storm. But then, that basically gives you one extremely strong turn, and is that really as good as the other S tier emblems who usually have some pretty strong passives, except Viola? In the end, I decided that they were a good fit in A tier. Their ability to stack extra turns on one unit is definitely really strong on the right unit, but it's just not as versatile as Byleth's ability to give an extra turn to 4 units, and the other S tier units feel like they have more tools and passes that make them stronger to bring. Still, I'd rather have the house leaders than anyone in B or below. They feel strong, but mostly fair, a sentiment that may not continue for the other DLC emblems. Next up is Tiki, the emblem that can turn you into a dragon. This emblem gives you a free 4 defense and 10 HP just for equipping it, making most units who use it pretty bulky. Then we have the engaged skill Teutonic Form, which turns you into a dragon, giving you another 10 HP and plus 5 to all basic stats and plus 5 build. Yes, plus 5 to literally everything while you're engaged. It's not Ike level tanking, sure, but the big buffs to HP mean that units can usually take magic hits better than with Ike, and you get better damage output for offense and some speed, which is good for both offense and defense. It's crazy. It's like the most all-purpose buff ever made. While armored units are in dragon form, they ignore terrain damage, letting you waltz through fire by your own free will, while mystical units get a nice plus 5 res to really not let mages hurt them. Being a dragon also means you can't use your normal weapons while engaged at all. Don't worry, Tiki has her own really powerful weapons to grant you. Your basic attack is Eternal Claw. The damage can be a little low at 10 might, but it can double unlike the other dragon weapons and has 30 crit. Units who crit often and have high speed like Yunaka love running around with this weapon and ruining everybody's day. Tail Smash gives you a lot more oomph at 22 might, but as a smash weapon cannot double. It's probably one of the most accurate unforged smash weapons in the game with 85 hit, so it's one of your better options for pushing people around. Lastly, we have the breath attacks. These change depending on the type of unit using the dragon form, but they are all really strong AoE attacks. This is the only AoE that isn't attached to an engage attack, and having an AoE that you can spam every single turn and even have multiple times per turn with a dance is much stronger than the other AoE units we get access to. It hits in a cone, which seems like a weird shape at first, but is actually the perfect shape for a Fire Emblem AoE. If units attack you on enemy phase, they very naturally arrange themselves in cone shapes for you most of the time. This makes it really easy to devastate all the idiots who dare to attack you on the next player phase. Also, the 75 hit only applies to the first attack, and the AoE damage to the units in the back is automatically applied even if it misses. Like with smash attacks, you cannot strike first or follow up with these weapons. The most common breath type is Fire Breath, which is held by backup, cavalry, covert, and Qui-Adept units. This attack ignores half the enemy defense and makes the 10 might a little deceptive. It also sets the square in front of you on fire, but that's the only tile it does, so it's a little weird, and honestly, it's not very useful for setting fire. Next, we have Ice Breath. This is given exclusively to armor units, and after dealing damage, this freezes your enemies in the cone, causing them to be unable to move next turn. This is really nice crowd control, just like Corrin's freeze, and does great at making sure enemies don't gang up on you too much. Next is Flame Breath, which, believe it or not, is technically different from Fire Breath. When looking at just the description of Flame Breath, you might not think that it's anything interesting going for it. It seems to do less damage at only 70% damage and has no clear benefits. But if you happen to slap Tiki on a flying unit, you'll quickly realize that Flame Breath actually goes out one space further than Fire Breath does, giving you a larger AoE area. Honestly, I think it might be the best version of Tiki's Fire Breath, and also definitely the most hit. Dark Breath is for mystical units and deals damage based on their magic while ignoring half of their res. Dark Breath is obviously very strong on mages. Sucks when your mage unit is actually technically cavalry or something like that, but on actual mystical units, really strong. Fog Breath is used by dragons, and is also effective against dragon enemies. This breath creates fog, so if your enemies survive, they now have increased evasion. On the other hand, if you kill with this, you can use the evasion for yourself. It still feels like a weird effect to tie to an attack, and for that reason, I think this is one of the only emblems in the game that is worst on Allier. For sync skills, we get access to 4 spear skills. Star Spear, which you get at Bond 1, adds 15% to your final growth rates. This is a huge boost to your growth, and if you get it on a unit early enough, they'll be straining against their stat caps by endgame. It stacks with Jean's growth boost as well, in case you were wondering. You can inherit this for 1,500 SP, which is pretty reasonable considering how strong of a boost it gives to your units. Geosphere gives 5 defense and res to units that start the turn adjacent to Tiki. It's not the strongest skill ever for inheriting purposes, unless you give it to a ton of people to buff your whole army, but as a sync skill on Tiki, the boost is nice and appreciated. The buff lasts until the end of the turn too, so you'll have it through enemy phase as well. Life Sphere heals you if you click wait by 40 HP at max level and restores your status to normal. It's really good on your tanky units who probably take damage often and don't want to attack on your turn. Light Spear halves your chance of being crit when you initiate combat. This isn't good to inherit, but as a sync skill, it keeps Tiki from being crit, which lets her tank much better. For your engage attack, we get Divine Blessing. This gives your unit a revival stone. You know, one of those things enemy bosses have that give them an extra health bar. Yeah, no, it seems fair to me too. If you've got a unit in a bit of danger, or if you got an extra engage turn in between enemy waves, throw this on your unit to make sure they survive. The revival stone does not go away until it is used, or you put a second revival stone on a unit. The best part about revival stones, you can just make bad plays with them. I can throw a unit out there who has like a 40% chance of getting killed, and maybe they'll live, and if they do, I can just do it again next turn because I still have my revival stone. It lets you play so stupidly compared to any other ability in the game. It's crazy. Dragon units get a synergy which lets them heal another unit for 20 HP when they use Divine Blessing, which is nice when you happen to use it on someone who is hurt but isn't game-changing. Qui-Adept's units heal your allies' status effect. Great if you forgot your Restore Staff, or you can't use your Restore Staff because your Qui-Adept is now a giant dragon. But let's not forget about Divine Blessing Plus! If Tiki is next to Marth, you get additional effects. These effects change depending on if the unit has an emblem. In order to get these, you just need to be next to Marth while using Divine Blessing. Marth does not have to be the target. If the unit targeted has no emblem equipped, their HP heals to full, making the dragon synergy irrelevant. If your ally has an emblem equipped, but is not engaged, you get 3 points on your engage meter, which is great for refilling your unit's engage energy if they've already used their engage recently, but is obviously worthless if your engage meter is already full. And if they are engaged, it restores an engaged turn to your unit. Great if you need your unit to stay engaged for a little bit longer, but overall, though Divine Blessing Plus is definitely good, I find that the basic effect of the Revival Stone is so strong that it doesn't need the plus effect, and it usually isn't worth trying to get Marth into position next to the unit you want to give the revival stone to. Last, let's talk about inheritance. You get HP and luck plus 10 for 3,600. Luck I could take or leave, and the HP buff is less than what Corrin gets. That being said, if for some reason I really wanted to buff luck on my unit, getting it with HP is way better than Violet's plus luck on its own, and compared to the other DLC plus 2 stat skills, this one isn't insanely costly. Special Guard 5 lets you take 5 less damage from special attacks. The only attacks I know of that go into this category are the fireballs from Corrupted Wyverns. Since those ignore half of your defense, Special Guard is kind of nice. It only costs 1000 SP for the highest level, which isn't bad at all. But they're too rare of an enemy type to justify inheriting this. It's usually pretty easy to bait them and kill them without it. For proficiencies, Tiki gives combat arts, which is fine early game for getting units into art classes. For Tiki, and many of the other DLC emblems coming up, I've decided to put her in a tier above S. Welcome to $29.99 tier, Tiki. This tier is for emblems that are so powerful they break the game, and Tiki does that. Tiki makes literally any unit in the game into a powerful combat unit when they engage, and helps fix a lot of the unit's low growths. Her access to AoEs without an emblem attack is incredibly powerful. Her ability to give a unit a revival stone is insane. Her sync skills give her a wide array of passive buffs that make her tank enemies much easier. She is easily the most powerful emblem we've looked at so far. But it's not really fair to move the other S tiers down when they're still the best in the vanilla game. So, $29.99 tier, home of Tiki and perhaps a few others. It's likely that we'll have a couple other DLC tiers up here, maybe to help differentiate between the DLC units later, we'll see. For now, I ask you to please subscribe to the channel so you can see the Wave 2 video that's coming up within the next few days. You won't want to miss it.